When I first met him, everything felt effortless. We clicked right away, and I swear it felt like we'd known each other for years. It wasn't just the way he smiled or the way he looked at me, it was something deeper, something I couldn't explain. Every conversation seemed to flow so naturally, every laugh felt genuine. I remember thinking that he was the one. You know that feeling when you're just so sure about something? That was us. He was kind, funny, caring, and treated me like I was the most important person in the world. We didn't rush anything. There was no pressure, no games. It just felt right. We spent hours talking, going on little adventures together, just enjoying each other's company. Our weekends were filled with spontaneous dates, watching movies, or cooking dinner at home. He was always there when I needed him, and I trusted him completely. And for a long time, that trust was unshakable. I really thought I had found my person, the one I'd end up with. But then things started to change. Slowly at first, so subtly that I almost didn't notice it happening. I'd ask him if everything was okay, and he'd assure me that it was. It wasn't anything major at first, just these little shifts. He'd sometimes come home later than expected, his excuses vague and unconvincing. He started spending more time on his phone, scrolling through it for what felt like hours without engaging in our usual conversations. At first, I chalked it up to the stress at work, or maybe just needing some space. Everyone needs their own time, right? But as the weeks went by, the changes became more noticeable. The quiet dinners, the extra hours at work, the guys' nights that seemed to pop up more and more. I started to feel this odd sense of unease, like I was missing something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I'd catch him staring at his phone with a strange expression, or see him suddenly go quiet when I walked into the room. He'd still tell me that everything was fine, that he was just tired, or that he was working on something important, and every time I believed him. After all, it was probably just a phase. Maybe I was overthinking it. He was busy, right? He was still my guy, the one I trusted, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a rough patch. I kept telling myself that, hoping that things would go back to normal. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, I was missing something bigger. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, that maybe he was going through something and didn't know how to talk about it. It wasn't like him to be distant, but sometimes people just get overwhelmed, right? I'd seen him stressed before. Work had been crazy, and I figured that's all it was. He'd pull away a little, then come back to me, and everything would go back to normal. That's how it had always worked, so why would this be any different? But the more I tried to convince myself it was just a temporary thing, the more the little signs seemed to pile up. I found myself questioning his every excuse. He told me he was working late, but then I'd notice his car wasn't in the driveway when I knew he should have been home. Or when he'd come home late, he smelled like cologne, too much cologne, like he'd been out somewhere. But then, in the same breath, he'd tell me how much he missed me, how he couldn't wait to spend time together. It made me feel like maybe I was just being dramatic, overthinking everything. He loved me. I knew that. And when I asked him if everything was okay, he'd smile and assure me it was, giving me that look that made me feel silly for even asking. "You're just tired, babe. It's nothing." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, because the idea that something might be wrong, that maybe he wasn't as committed as I thought, was too painful to even consider. I had spent so long telling myself that he was the one. I had given so much of my heart to this relationship that the thought of him slipping away was a nightmare I wasn't ready to face. So I buried those feelings of doubt. I pushed them down and ignored them. But there was a part of me that kept feeling uneasy, like something wasn't quite right. Small things, like how he'd disappear for hours and come back with no explanation. When I asked where he had been, he'd shrug it off, saying he'd been hanging out with friends or that work had run late again. Every time I'd tell myself it was nothing. I didn't want to sound crazy, didn't want to be that person who was always suspicious. The tension between us kept building, though. We'd argue over the smallest things. I'd feel neglected, like he wasn't really present when we were together. But then, every time I started to pull away, he'd do something sweet, bring me my favorite coffee, hold me a little longer when I hugged him, whisper how much he cared. It felt like he was trying to reassure me, to remind me that everything was fine, even when the little cracks were starting to show. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't like he was being mean. He was still kind, still loving in his own way. But the connection between us was different, distant somehow. Every time I'd try to talk about how I was feeling, he'd make me feel like I was the one in the wrong, that maybe I just needed to relax. Babe, you're just overthinking it. You know I love you. And for a moment, I buy it, thinking that maybe I really was just paranoid. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, that things would go back to normal, that this weird distance would eventually fade and we'd find our rhythm again. But as the days went on, it became harder to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to believe that I was seeing the beginning of the end, so I held on to those reassuring moments, those small gestures that kept me hoping. I told myself that if I just trusted him a little more, things would get better. And yet every day felt like I was walking a little further into unknown territory, the ground beneath me becoming shakier with each passing moment. It wasn't just the distance between us anymore. It was the feeling that he was pulling away entirely. Little things I had brushed off before were becoming harder to ignore. I noticed it in his phone habits. He started keeping his phone face down when we were together, even during dinner. Before, it had always been casually lying around, never hidden or guarded. But now he'd get a notification, glance at it, and quickly lock it without saying anything. It wasn't a huge red flag, but it was the first time I realized he wasn't being as open as he used to be. Then there were the texts. I didn't mean to snoop, I really didn't, but I caught glimpses of them every now and then. Short, cryptic messages, never anything long enough for me to understand. They didn't make sense to me, and that only made me more curious. Sometimes he'd even go as far as leaving the room to answer them. It didn't make sense. Who needs to leave the room to answer a text from a friend? I tried to tell myself that maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking things, just looking for something to be wrong. But then the patterns started to emerge. The extra hours at work became more frequent. The guys' nights out were happening almost every weekend. At first, I thought, okay, maybe he just wants to blow off some steam with his friends. It's normal. But as the weeks went on, it became clear this wasn't just about needing some space. It was becoming a routine. There were other signs, too. He started coming home later and later, smelling faintly of cologne, but not the same cologne he usually wore. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to notice these changes. And when I asked him about it, he'd smile that reassuring smile and say, "Babe, you're just being paranoid. You know I wouldn't lie to you." But the unease inside me was growing, a knot I couldn't untangle. Part of me wanted to believe him, to trust him like I had before. But another part of me was telling me that something was wrong, that something was slipping through my fingers, even though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I'd lie awake at night, replaying all the little moments in my mind, his hurried excuses, his distracted glances, the way he pulled away just a little bit more each day. Was I crazy for thinking this way? I wondered, the doubt creeping in. Maybe I was just overreacting. People get busy. People change. It's normal. He still smiled at me, still said all the right things, still told me he loved me every day. But the question lingered in my mind. Why did it feel like there was something else going on behind the scenes? I found myself in this emotional tug of war. I wanted to trust him, to believe in the man I had fallen in love with. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off, that maybe I wasn't seeing the full picture. I had been in relationships before, and I knew when something wasn't right, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to face the possibility that this perfect love story might not be so perfect after all. One night, I decided to confront him. I had to, right? But then the second guessing kicked in. What if I was wrong? What if I was just projecting my insecurities onto him? What if it was all in my head, and I was going to ruin everything by making accusations? My mind was spinning in circles, torn between my gut feeling and the fear of facing the truth. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, something was coming to a head. Every small thing felt like a piece of a puzzle that I was too afraid to put together. I didn't know what would happen if I confronted him, but I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. It felt like an impending storm, one that was coming closer with every passing day. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand in the eye of it without getting swept away. Something had to give. I just didn't know if I was ready for what I might find. It was one of those days that should have been like any other. I had stayed home, enjoying the quiet, waiting for him to come back from work. He hadn't mentioned anything about being late, but I could feel something was off. I hadn't meant to snoop. I really hadn't. But something inside me told me I had to check his phone. Maybe it was the little voice in the back of my head, telling me that if I didn't, I might always wonder. When I picked up his phone, it wasn't like I was searching for something. I just wanted to see if maybe there was a message from Wook or a note he had meant to show me. But as I unlocked it, the screen immediately revealed something I hadn't expected. There on the home screen was a text message preview. The name was unfamiliar, someone I didn't recognize. And the message itself, the words, my heart sank. It wasn't just casual chatting. It was intimate, the kind of text you send when no one else is around, the kind of conversation that only happens in private. The messages were filled with flirtation, and the last one, it was a kiss emoji followed by, I can't wait to see you tonight. My stomach dropped into my feet. I couldn't breathe for a moment, staring at those words as everything around me seemed to slow down. I felt like I was in some sort of surreal dream. My heart pounded in my chest. The world felt muffled, like everything was happening around me, but I couldn't process it. Betrayal, anger, heartbreak, all of it slammed into me in waves. It was like my body had been struck by lightning, and I was left standing there, completely paralyzed. I knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was real. This was proof. And as I stared at that screen, I could feel my entire world crumble in an instant. All those doubts, all those moments of uncertainty I'd tried to ignore, had suddenly been confirmed in the most devastating way possible. I had been right. But being right didn't feel good. It felt like the worst thing in the world. For a few moments, I was frozen. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the phone, the weight of the discovery sinking in deeper with every passing second. My mind was racing, but my body felt numb, like I was watching myself from the outside. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or how to react. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw the phone at the wall, to confront him right then and there. But another part of me was so lost in shock that I couldn't move. And then the front door opened. He was home. The sound of his footsteps brought me back to reality, and I quickly shoved the phone into my pocket, my hands shaking. I couldn't let him see me like this. I couldn't let him see the storm I was feeling inside. I tried to hold it together, tried to pretend nothing was wrong, but my mind was in a whirlwind of emotions. The truth had come crashing down, and I had no idea how to handle it. When he walked in, I couldn't even look at him. My heart was still racing, and I felt this tight knot in my throat. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I didn't know if I could say anything without falling apart. But I knew that everything had changed. I managed to ask him how his day had gone, my voice almost too calm, too controlled. He smiled and started talking about his day, oblivious, thinking everything was fine. But inside, I was burning. Every word he said felt like a lie. Every second of his presence felt like a betrayal. I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is she?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. He froze. The smile faded from his face as realization hit. I could see the panic in his eyes, the way his posture stiffened. It was like everything inside him instantly shifted. He wasn't ready for this. Not yet. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. But I saw through it. I knew what I had seen. "I saw the texts," I said, my voice finally breaking. "Don't lie to me." His face turned pale, but he quickly recovered, trying to cover it up. "Babe, it's not what you think. I swear, it's nothing. You're overreacting." But I wasn't overreacting. I could feel it in my bones. Everything about this moment screamed lie. He was trying to talk his way out of it, but the truth was already out there, hanging in the air between us. "It's exactly what I think," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I know what I saw." He started to get defensive. "You don't understand, okay? It's not what you think it is. She's just a friend. We were just talking. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I couldn't even process the words he was saying. They felt like noise, just empty attempts to justify what was already undeniable. The anger started to rise in me, but so did something else. This strange calmness. The kind of calm that comes when you finally see the truth after so much confusion. Everything I had been holding on to for so long, the doubts, the questions, the fear, had all collapsed in a matter of seconds. And now I had to face it. I had to face him. As the conversation continued, I felt like I was on autopilot, just going through the motions. I didn't even recognize the person I was talking to anymore. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved, was now someone I couldn't even look at without feeling disgusted. I was trying to process everything, but the shock was too much, and my thoughts were racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. What do I do now? How do I even begin to make sense of this? But there was no going back now. The truth had been revealed and everything was different. There was no more pretending. I could feel my heart shattering as I realized that the person I thought I knew so well was someone entirely different. And the worst part, I didn't know if I could ever look at him the same way again. The silence between us stretched on like a taut rope, each second pulling tighter and tighter until I could barely breathe. My hands were trembling, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't even name. There was nothing left to say. The proof was in front of us, plain as day. I could see it in his eyes, the panic, the guilt, the desperation. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. I had been holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, it was all a misunderstanding, but now that hope had been shattered. "I saw the texts," I said again, this time with more certainty. "I saw what you've been doing behind my back. You can't lie your way out of this. Who is she?" His face paled as the reality of my words sank in. His lips parted as if to speak, but then he hesitated, clearly struggling to form a response. He wasn't ready for this. The person he'd been pretending to be was crumbling, piece by piece, and I could see the cracks in his facade. "Abe, listen, it's not what you think," he said, his voice low and almost pleading. "I swear she's just a friend. We were just talking. It didn't mean anything." I could feel my heart racing, the blood boiling. How dare he? How could he stand there and say that to me with a straight face, knowing what I had seen? The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. "You're kidding, right?" I spat, my voice trembling with anger. "You really expect me to believe that? You think I'm that stupid?" My chest tightened as the tears began to rise, but I pushed them back, refusing to let him see the vulnerability I was fighting to hold on to. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, stepping forward as if to comfort me, but I recoiled instinctively. "I didn't know how to tell you. It got out of hand. But it doesn't mean anything. You've got to understand. Please." "Don't," I snapped, shaking my head. "Don't you dare say that to me. It didn't mean anything? You've been lying to my face for God knows how long, and now you're telling me it didn't mean anything?" The words were coming faster now, pouring out of me like a dam that had finally broken. What about the late nights, the phone on silent, the lies about working late and hanging out with friends? How do you explain that? He looked away for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor, trying to avoid the confrontation. But I wasn't letting him off that easily. This wasn't something I could just forgive, not when the evidence was staring us both in the face. "I was confused," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what I wanted, but it was never supposed to hurt you, I swear. You were everything to me. But this other thing, it was nothing." "Nothing?" I repeated, incredulous. "You call this nothing? You betrayed me. You lied to me. You had the audacity to pretend everything was fine while sneaking around behind my back. And now you want to tell me it was nothing? You think I'm just going to let you off the hook because you're confused?" My voice cracked as the weight of it all hit me. Every moment, every little lie, every excuse he'd given, it all flashed before my eyes in an instant. His face was a mix of guilt and frustration, but I could see the selfishness behind his eyes too. He didn't understand. He didn't get how much this had shattered me, how his actions had completely broken the trust I had given him. He wasn't apologizing because he was sorry. He was apologizing because he had been caught. I could feel the anger surging through me, but alongside it, there was something else, something more painful than the anger. It was the raw, gut-wrenching heartbreak of realizing that the person I had given my heart to, the person I thought I could trust with everything, had been lying to me all along. "You've destroyed me," I said, my voice breaking as the tears finally spilled over. "You shattered everything I thought we had. All the good moments, the love, the trust. It was all a lie. You've made a fool of me, and I don't even know who you are anymore." His expression softened for a brief second, guilt flickering in his eyes. But then he quickly tried to salvage the situation as though he could undo the damage. "I never meant for it to be like this. Please, don't leave me. We can work through this. We've always worked through things before." But there was a shift inside me, something that had been slowly building, waiting for this moment. The moment I would finally realize that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. It felt like the room was spinning, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay. Not like this. Not with someone who didn't respect me, who had shown me nothing but dishonesty. "I can't," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who thinks it's okay to treat me this way. You've broken me in ways I didn't even know were possible." He looked at me, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe what I was saying. "Please don't do this. Please don't leave." But I knew, deep down, that there was no going back. I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from the illusion of the relationship we had built. I was walking away from the person I thought he was. I couldn't keep living in this toxic environment, pretending everything was fine when it was falling apart. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady now. I was done with the lies. I was done with the manipulation. And as hard as it was to say, I knew it was the only way I could begin to heal. With that, I turned and walked away. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the only thing I could do. As I walked away, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. My heart was still heavy, aching from the loss, but there was also this strange sense of empowerment. It felt like I finally taken control of my own life, like I made a decision that was for me and not for him. The sadness lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't quite leave, but it was no longer drowning me. I knew deep down that I had made the right choice. Walking away was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the only thing that would allow me to move forward, to begin the healing process. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I would sit alone, replaying everything in my mind. Our good times, the laughs we shared, the promises he made. But with each passing day, I began to see things more clearly. I had trusted him with everything I had, and he had taken that trust and shattered it. He had manipulated me into believing I wasn't enough, when in reality, he was the one who wasn't enough. And that was something I had to remind myself of. He didn't define me. His betrayal didn't define me. As time went on, I began to reflect on the relationship. I thought about all the signs I had ignored, the little moments when I felt uneasy but pushed them aside because I didn't want to face the truth. I thought about the lies, the excuses, the times I rationalized his behavior. I realized that the red flags had always been there, but I had chosen to turn a blind eye, convincing myself that things would get better, that I was just overthinking. But now I understood. Those doubts I had were my instincts trying to speak to me. They were trying to protect me from the hurt that was inevitable. And though I hated the pain of the betrayal, I had to acknowledge that it had taught me something. It had taught me to trust myself more, to listen to those quiet voices in my head that told me something wasn't right. It had taught me that I deserved better than the lies I had been fed. I deserved honesty. I deserved respect. I deserved someone who would never make me feel second best. I wasn't just recovering from a broken relationship. I was reclaiming my own worth. I was learning to love myself again without relying on someone else's validation. It was empowering in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked into that relationship. I was stronger now, more aware of my own needs, more cautious of who I allowed into my life. There were still moments when I missed him, the comfort of his presence, the familiar routines, but those moments became less frequent. I wasn't in love with him anymore. I was in love with the person I was becoming. And as time passed, I found peace. The anger faded, and the sadness slowly ebbed away. What remained was a new sense of freedom, a new sense of possibility. I knew I had made the right decision, and though it wasn't easy, I was moving forward. There would be other relationships, other lessons, and I would approach them with a wisdom I hadn't had before. I would trust my instincts. I would set boundaries. I would never settle for anything less than what I deserved. I closed my eyes and let out a deep breath, a small smile forming on my lips. It had been hard, but it had been worth it. I had walked away from the trail, and now I was walking towards something better. I was walking toward my own future, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I was going to be okay. To anyone going through something similar, I would say this: trust yourself. Don't ignore the red flags. Don't let someone else's lies convince you that you don't deserve better. You are worthy of love, of honesty, of respect. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, know that walking away, though painful, is sometimes the bravest and most empowering thing you can do for yourself. It's the first step in reclaiming your peace, your self-worth, and your happiness. And in the end, that's all that matters.